Good day, everyone. This is Bob Roswick of the Bismarck Air Museum, and with me today is Tom Trousdale, our docent, for another episode of The Docent and the Doctor. Today we're talking about the Lockheed Orion, and it's a continuation of our last episode. I got Tom on pause, so let's go ahead and hit his button and turn him loose. The other thing we got in this picture is we got a little tiny door here. Tom, is this meant to keep us fat guys out of there?
No, that was actually a emergency escape door on the fuselage. The other side has the main door, and then you go back a little bit and you'll see a little door right behind the window. That was the luggage compartment door. And then the other thing that you'll notice, I mentioned on the Northwest Airlines planes, or Airways planes, the wings were dark. You'll see on Hal Roach's airplane, the wings were dark there also. That was a habit that Lockheed picked up simply because they wanted the aircraft to be noticed both on the ground and in the air.
And here's another thing we didn't touch on, but I just was noticing it. If you notice, we have a lot of little lines here around the tail, and I think what we have is we got a flying tail here. This is probably your adjustable tail.
I think it is. I think it's a very early Lockheed adjustable tail. You better believe it.
Yeah, interesting. So we're like much ahead. You know, this for a 1930s aircraft, this thing has got some features that are quite modern.
Still used today, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
All right, here we got a little picture of some maintenance work. Kind of tells us a couple things.
Obviously, it's probably an overhaul of the engine. I would venture to guess that this is probably a dark green aircraft with a bright yellow or a bright orange stripe going back on the fuselage. I would also probably venture to say that this is probably a privately owned Lockheed Orion. I know of a couple of other people that had him in the 30s, and one was the Hearst organization out in California. He had one. I happened to go through his hangar one time, probably 50 years ago, and he had some pictures in there of the aircraft when they had it at San Simeon, where the Hearst Castle is.
Interesting. I think the other thing that I really get tickled about is that this plane is quite a bit in the air, and really it's on its landing gear. If you look behind here, it's just sitting on its wheels with the tail up in the air.
Right, yeah. Again, probably just to check everything out and make sure that the flaps would function properly, that all the controls were connected right way, and just probably a complete overhaul of the whole aircraft.
Sounds good. Here we have some drawings of the airplane. Is there anything we can learn from this, Tom?
Well, there we see our Lockheed Star, and the thing that you learn here is everybody wanted a Lockheed. You see the top one says Detroit News. They used it for being a news cruiser. The bottom one is a military one, and the interesting thing about that is when World War II happened, most, if not all, of the civilian aircraft were grounded. They were either taken over by the Army, which included some stagger wing Beechcrafts and private aircraft. If they didn't draft years into the service, they came around and took the prop. And I learned that from an old guy that flew in World War II down at Mott. He said his aircraft sat there the remainder of World War II in a hangar with its prop missing.
So you could either give up the plane or just not fly it.
Correct.
I think we learned a little bit about that in our very first episode of The Docent and the Doctor when we talked about the DC-3, the city of Bismarck. That plane was reworked because we thought that there were probably, let me rephrase that, you thought that there was probably only two DC-3s flying to Bismarck during the war.
Right. As a matter of fact, we looked it up. A friend of mine who was a dispatcher for Northwest, he's since retired, and he saw that Northwest, at the beginning of the war, Northwest had 9 DC-3s. The Army or the military came in and took 7 of them and left them 2, and that was one of the big reasons why the city of Bismarck had to be rebuilt and rebuilt fast.
Quite interesting. Here we got a couple of famous aviators. Tell us about this picture, Tom.
Well, this is a picture of Wiley Post and pick me up, Doc. Who's the
Will Rogers is
Will Rogers? There we go.
Yeah, the guy with the fedora is Will Rogers.
Old age catching up with me. Yeah, Wiley Post and Will Rogers wanted to fly around the world. Will Rogers was a big booster of aviation in the 30s, and his newspaper column went to over 400 newspapers. And he talked his editor into hiring Wiley Post and helping him get an aircraft. And you will see that it is an Orion, but it was kind of a bastardized Orion, in that it is it came from TWA, but Wiley Post modified it, and Lockheed didn't want anything to do with it because he lengthened the fuselage. And an airplane that flies with what's called a CG, a center of gravity, it has to be perfectly balanced. And then the other big mistake that he made was he put on floats on it, and the Orion was designed to use floats, but it wasn't designed to use floats after being lengthened. And the floats and the length of the fuselage set the center of gravity back, and what they think happened, I've read two excuses that what they believe happened with Post and Rogers. Number one, they got lost and landed at an Eskimo village to see where they were, and he shut the engine off and talked to the Eskimos and got back in, and they think carburetor ice formed on the engine. And as he took off, he wrapped it into a tight climbing turn, and the ice formed just enough to deprive the gas to the engine, and it stalled out and flipped over on its back and went in. And the other one basically says that, as simple as it sounds, they ran out of gas. They were low on gas, and they landed to try and find where the next village was, where they knew gas was, but their mistake was in landing and asking for directions and then taking back off again. In that second scenario, the guy says if they'd have flown on and gotten a little higher in altitude, they'd have seen their next stop, which was about 30 miles away.
And my recollection of this event too is that these planes weren't exactly landing on lakes. They were kind of landing on inland waterways on the ocean, and they were tidal. And so you can even see in the crash site, they landed in quite shallow water. There wasn't any place to recover by flipping over into deep water and recovering that way. These were tidal flats, and they were shallow. Well, with that, Tom, this plane is turning out to be quite interesting. And once again, I'm going to put you on hold, and we're going to pick this up with our next session. The Bismarck Air Museum Foundation is trying to capture and restore the building you see before you, the large round-top hangar at the Bismarck Airport known as Hangar Number 5. Log on to our website at bismarckairmuseum.org. Give us a donation. Log on to Facebook under Bismarck Air Museum. Subscribe to this channel on YouTube. Once again, I'd like to thank Tom for helping us understand these iconic photos.